The Magic Ring, a fairy tale from the Yellow Fairy Book, Part 2. One day it suddenly came into Martin's mind that he would like to get married, and moreover that he would choose a very grand wife, a king's daughter in short. But as he did not trust himself as a wooer, he determined to send his old mother on the mission. "You must go to the king," he said to her, "and demand the hand of his lovely daughter in marriage for me." "What are you thinking of, my son?" answered the old woman, aghast at the idea. "Why cannot you marry someone in your own rank? That would be far more fitting than to send a poor old woman like me a-wooing to the king's court for the hand of a princess. Why, it is as much as our heads are worth. Neither my life nor yours would be worth anything if I went on such a fool's errand." "Never fear, little mother," answered Martin. "Trust me, all will be well, but see that you do not come back without an answer of some kind." And so, obedient to her son's behest, the old woman hobbled off to the palace, and without being hindered, reached the courtyard and began to mount the flight of steps leading to the royal presence chamber. At the head of the landing, rows of courtiers were collected in magnificent attire, who stared at the queer old figure, and called to her, and explained to her with every kind of sign that it was strictly forbidden to mount those steps. But their stern words and forbidding gestures made no impression whatever on the old woman, and she resolutely continued to climb the stairs, bent on carrying out her son's orders. Upon this, some of the courtiers seized her by the arms and held her back by sheer force, at which she set up such a yell that the king himself heard it, and stepped out onto the balcony to see what was the matter. When he beheld the old woman flinging her arms wildly about, and heard her scream that she would not leave the place till she had laid her case before the king, he ordered that she should be brought into his presence. And forthwith she was conducted into the golden presence chamber, where, leaning back amongst cushions of royal purple, the king sat, surrounded by his counselors and courtiers. Curtsying low, the old woman stood silent before him. "Well, my good old dame, what can I do for you?" asked the king.
"I have come," replied Martin's mother, "and your majesty must not be angry with me. I have come a-wooing."
"Is this woman out of her mind?" said the king, with an angry frown. But Martin's mother answered boldly,
"If the king will only listen patiently to me and give me a straightforward answer, he will see that I am not out of my mind. You, O king, have a lovely daughter to give in marriage. I have a son, a wooer, as clever a youth and as good a son-in-law as you will find in your whole kingdom. There is nothing that he cannot do. Now tell me, O king, plump and plain, will you give your daughter to my son as wife?" The king listened to the end of the old woman's strange request, but every moment his face grew blacker and his features sterner, till all at once he thought to himself, "Is it worth while that I, the king, should be angry with this poor old fool?" And all the courtiers and counselors were amazed when they saw the hard lines round his mouth and the frown on his brow grow smooth, and heard the mild but mocking tones in which he answered the old woman, saying, "If your son is as wonderfully clever as you say, and if there is nothing in the world that he cannot do, let him build a magnificent castle just opposite my palace windows in 24 hours. The palace must be joined together by a bridge of pure crystal. On each side of the bridge there must be growing trees, having golden and silver apples, and with birds of paradise among the branches. At the right of the bridge there must be a church with 5 golden cupolas. In this church your son shall be wedded to my daughter, and we will keep the wedding festivities in the new castle. But if he fails to execute this my royal command, then, as a just but mild monarch,
I shall give orders that you and he are taken, and first dipped in tar, and then in feathers, and you shall be executed in the marketplace for the entertainment of my courtiers." And a smile played round the king's lips as he finished speaking, and his courtiers and counselors shook with laughter when they thought of the old woman's folly, and praised the king's wise device, and said to each other, "What a joke it will be when we see the pair of them tarred and feathered! The son is just as able to grow a beard on the palm of his hand as to execute such a task in 24 hours. Now the poor old woman was mortally afraid, and in a trembling voice she asked,
"Is that really your royal will, O king? Must I take this order to my poor son?"
"Yes, O dame, such is my command. If your son carries out my order, he shall be rewarded with my daughter. But if he fails, away to the tar barrel and the stake with you both." On her way home, the poor old woman shed bitter tears, and when she saw Martin, she told him what the king had said, and sobbed out, "Didn't I tell you, my son, that you should marry someone of your own rank? It would have been better for us this day if you had. As I told you, my going to court has been as much as our lives are worth, and now we will both be tarred and feathered and burnt in the public marketplace. It is terrible." And she moaned and cried. "Never fear, little mother," answered Martin. "Trust me, and you will see all will be well. You may go to sleep with a quiet mind." And stepping to the front of the hut, Martin threw his ring from the palm of one hand into the other, upon which 12 youths instantly appeared, and demanded what he wanted them to do. Then he told them the king's commands, and they answered that by next morning all should be accomplished exactly as the king had ordered. Next morning when the king awoke and looked out of his window, to his amazement he beheld a magnificent castle just opposite his own palace, and joined to it a bridge of pure crystal. At each side of the bridge trees were growing, from whose branches hung golden and silver apples, among which birds of paradise perched. At the right, gleaming in the sun, were the 5 golden cupolas of a splendid church, whose bells rang out as if they would summon people from all corners of the earth to come and behold the wonder. Now, though the king would much rather have seen his future son-in-law tarred, feathered, and burnt at the stake, he remembered his royal oath, and had to make the best of a bad business. So he took heart of grace and made Martin a duke, and gave his daughter a rich dowry, and prepared the grandest wedding feast that had ever been seen, so that to this day the old people in the country still talk of it. After the wedding, Martin and his royal bride went to dwell in the magnificent new palace, and here Martin lived in the greatest comfort and luxury, such luxury as he had never imagined. But though he was as happy as the day was long, and as merry as a grig, the king's daughter fretted all day, thinking of the indignity that had been done to her in making her marry Martin, the poor widow's son, instead of a rich young prince from a foreign country. So unhappy was she that she spent all her time wondering how she should get rid of her undesirable husband. At first, she determined to learn the secret of his power, and with flattering, caressing words, she tried to coax him to tell her how he was so clever that there was nothing in the world that he could not do. At first, he would tell her nothing, but once, when he was in a yielding mood, she approached him with a winning smile on her lovely face, and speaking flattering words to him, she gave him a potion to drink with a sweet, strong taste. And when he had drunk it, Martin's lips were unsealed, and he told her that all his power lay in the magic ring that he wore on his finger, and he described to her how to use it, and still speaking, he fell into a deep sleep. And when she saw that the potion had worked, and that he was sound asleep, the princess took the magic ring from his finger, and going into the courtyard, she threw it from the palm of one hand into the other. On the instant, the 12 youths appeared and asked her what she commanded them to do. Then she told him that by the next morning they were to do away with the castle and the bridge and the church, and put in their stead the humble hut in which Martin used to live with his mother, and that while he slept, her husband was to be carried to his old lowly room, and that they were to bear her away to the utmost ends of the earth, where an old king lived who would make her welcome in his palace, and surround her with a state that befitted a royal princess. "You shall be obeyed," answered the 12 youths at the same moment. And lo and behold, the following morning, when the king awoke and looked out of his window, he beheld to his amazement that the palace, bridge, church, and trees had all vanished, and there was nothing in their place but a bare, miserable-looking hut. Immediately the king sent for his son-in-law and commanded him to explain what had happened. But Martin looked at his royal father-in-law and answered never a word. Then the king was very angry, and calling a council together, he charged Martin with having been guilty of witchcraft, and of having deceived the king, and having made away with the princess, and he was condemned to imprisonment in a high stone tower, with neither meat nor drink, till he should die of starvation. End of part 2.